Hi, this is Stephen Bones and this is Wednesday Wisdom. So, what is this work I do and how did I get here? And this follows on from last week's video when an old colleague of mine that's been following me for years in this new life I'm leading asked if my life is better or words to that effect. So, what is better? So, let's just sort of start where all this began. And what I'm going to give you is bullet points, by the way, because I want to get to the point of what I'm trying to deliver. So back in 2018, after many decades in sales and then having my own business, I've learned an awful lot. And going back in time, I remember when my boss used to approach me over something insignificant, but the way he delivered it made me feel insecure in my job. And I look back now, and why was that, I wonder? Well, here's what I've come up with. Because you see, when he made me feel insecure, it had caused me to look for another job. And what I did notice when these times arise, it was after about 3 years of me being with that company or with that person. And I was actually sort of getting bored, because my income had reached a point where they weren't going to pay me much more than inflation increases, even though I was on good money. And it wasn't growing as fast as I wanted. I'd sort of reached a pinnacle as an employee. Nothing was a challenge anymore and there was no more money. So my only alternative was to get into business. And I ended up with a partner because I didn't realise, and I look back now, it's a lot we don't realise, is I had an unconscious fear of actually going into business on my own. So I began to look for a partner and that's what I got. But he was pretty astute. He actually got me to guarantee the company's debts and paid me enough to make it really difficult for me to move, as we had a big mortgage and our vehicles belonged to the company. And to try and get that kind of reward and leave it was really hard. So I ended up trapped there, and I do say trapped for a good sort of 10 years. So let's just sort of fast forward. Let's just fast forward to the point where I bought the business. I lost my train of thought there. It was sort of felt like taking a plunge off a cliff without a parachute, because I left the company I was in partnership with and I bought my own business. And the fear and anxiety was absolutely immense. And I kept wondering what I'd done. Bear in mind that we got a mortgage, and it was a fairly reasonable size mortgage. I had to buy a car, and I bought an old one from somebody that there was nothing more I could afford. And I bought my wife an old car as well. So we'd gone from brand new cars to old cars so that we could keep paying the mortgage and keep our overheads down as low as possible. And bear in mind, we got 2 young children at this stage, with a third on the way, I think, at that point. But what I didn't realise that along the way, that I was in stress and overwhelm for years. So as I kept building and growing, I was still carrying that fear of jumping off a cliff, but I didn't realise it. And the main fear was actually losing what we had. I didn't want to lose the house. I didn't want to lose anything. And even when we were making good money and we had a profitable company, just hold on to that thought, what I'm saying, we were still in fear. And after about 18 years, we actually lost the business. And this was the pinnacle for me to begin to understand what was actually going on and what had gone on. And you see, what I know now is I was living in survival mode at that time, or overwhelm, and I had a dysregulated nervous system. My stomach was churning all the time, my chest was getting tight, I was sweating, I was waking up in the early hours of the morning. I could just go on and on where I was. And the fear, stress and anxiety I was feeling, I thought that actually goes with the territory of being in business or being in a corporate role with a lot of responsibility. I assumed it went with the territory and I just accepted it. And we did lose the company because that fear of losing the company that we had, that I had mainly over all those years, eventually came to fruition. Because you know about manifestation and abundance and the law of attraction that we all want with better life, with ease and flow. But what I do understand now, and I teach people, is that we actually need to be grounded, feel safe, and be very confident with a very regulated nervous system to be able to manifest that. And if we don't, we manifest the opposite from fear, and that's what I've done. So I'm talking from lived experience. So the big question you might be thinking at this stage is, can all this change? And yes, it can. And it changes with simple practices and techniques. And I now teach individuals on a one-to-one or a group basis, and I teach them to be more relaxed no matter what life throws at you. And once we learn these techniques, we can actually manifest a much better life. It's financially, we're better off, we have better relationships, we sleep better, and our energy levels are much higher, and actually our health is much better. And I can assure you that's where I am. I just get a bit of a cold from time to time. But other than that, my health is really good and everything checks out in my body, blood pressure, etc., etc. And especially blood pressure, because I did suffer from high blood pressure when I was like 40, 45, and now I've never had any trouble since I've begun doing this work. So if you do resonate with what I've been talking about, or and think about your team or employees, if they had these techniques, because they're all struggling in the same way but on a different level to you. I don't like the term level, but that's what I'm trying to point to, that because they may don't want their own business but trying to do the best as an employee, they still feel that insecurity, and they would be much better employees, much more productive, certainly better team players, and they'd be much more inclined to stay with you for the long haul because they see the vision as you do. And that's what tends to happen when we're in a place of security and with a regulated nervous system. So if you want to know more, message me. Now, my name's Stephen Bones with a PH. Stephen P with a PH, Bones, BONES.com, or you've got me on Facebook. You can message me, you can leave a comment here, and do subscribe and follow me. Because I do put more information out. But in a nutshell, that's what I do. That's what I deliver. And I do it from a lived experience point of view. And that is so important. It's like, how can somebody teach you how to be really good in business and know all the pitfalls if you haven't been in business? I know quite a lot of the pitfalls along the way, so I sort of get it and understand it. I'm not saying I could take you to a company to turn mega millions over, but I could certainly give you some tips to take you to 3 million plus turnover. But the whole point being is I ran 20 staff, lorries, warehouses, and you can do that with ease and flow without that overwhelm and dysregulated and not sleeping and not being stressed, and also help you get a bit of investment in your team, and you'll feel much better as well. So thanks for listening. My name's Stephen Bones, and we'll see you on the next video.